It's time for Wise Money with Korhorn Financial Group with certified financial planners Kevin Korhorn, Mike Bernard, and Josh Gregory.
Welcome to another episode of the Wise Money Show with Korhorn Financial Group, where every week we're helping you take your next wise step in your financial life. Thanks for being here, friends. My name is Mike Bernard. I am your host. I'm also one of the certified financial planners on the show. And with me in the KFT studios, my business partner and fellow CFP, Josh Gregory.
Well, you've heard us say many times before that tax planning helps you pay the least amount of tax over your lifetime and maybe the generations that follow as well. If that's true, then it's important to understand how the tax laws and policies impact your financial planning and your decision making. We're going to take a deeper dive into the impact that tax rules have on our daily lives with tax policy expert and author Scott Hodge.
All right, so just full and fair disclosure here. So we do get a couple of times a week different folks in the financial world reaching out saying, hey, I'd love to be a guest on your show. And, we've had guests before, different experts that we've picked. But when Scott reached out, we've used he's been with the Tax Foundation for a few decades, and I'll share that in a moment. But we said, absolutely, would love to have Scott on the show and share perspective as a tax policy expert. So if you have a question for the program, we would love to hear from you. You can call or text us 574-222-2000. That's 574-222-2000. Online, wisemoneyshow.com is where you can find us. And then all over social media, wherever you're at, we are there as well. Search the Wise Money Show. So you guys know we're passionate about tax planning. Tax planning is one of the 6 areas of your financial life. And you've got to look at all 6 areas when you're making big financial decisions. And tax planning is all about being proactive. So it's really about how are the current tax laws set up? And then therefore, should you make different decisions with your finances to improve your tax picture, paying the least amount of tax over your lifetime, if not multiple generations. So that is funding Roth versus pre-tax, doing Roth conversions, shoeboxing your HSA, all sorts of strategies like that. So we are thrilled to have Scott on the show. Scott is President Emeritus and Senior Policy Advisor for the Tax Foundation in Washington, D.C. He's been president for over 2 decades, leading that organization. He's recognized as one of Washington's leading experts on tax policy, the federal budget and government spending. My goodness, I can't wait to talk to him about that. Scott, welcome to the program. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks, Mike and Josh. It's great to be on the program. I really appreciate the opportunity to help you educate your listeners.
That's right. That's right. We share a common mission, that is to educate and increase the overall financial literacy and tax literacy so that you can make better financial decisions and have more financial freedom and financial independence. So here's the thing. We're going to get into a lot of tax topics, but I want to start by reading an excerpt from the introduction. It's that good from Scott's book, Taxocracy. So he's talking about the difference between 2 different educational benefits and the repeal of the $4,000 tuition and fees deduction. And because many people were taking that $4,000 deduction instead of a $2,000 credit, thinking, well, 4 is better than 2, even though a credit is better than a deduction. You guys know we talk about that all the time. So here's what he says. This is a relatively simple case of tax policy gone awry, but bad tax policy can have a much bigger impact on our lives. Taxes can influence how much we work, where we live, how much we save, how much we invest, what products we buy, and how many people a business can afford to hire. That's taxocracy. Scott, tell us in more detail, how would you define taxocracy? Let's get into it.
Well, Mike, I think there are 2 things in our dealings with government that we most, I think, dread, and that is taxes and bureaucracy. And I think that we live in a taxocracy because too many elements of our lives are really driven by tax policy. Our healthcare is determined by tax policy because we get healthcare oftentimes through our employer as a tax-free benefit. How we buy a house is often dictated by the mortgage interest deduction, the state and local tax deduction. We have in that case, our ability to get lower tuition or tax credit for education costs. We have child tax credits. The list goes on. There's over 220 different tax deductions and credits and exemptions in the tax code, and each and every one of them was put there by politicians for purposes that they had in mind, not necessarily things that we appreciate. And I think that it's important that people understand that a lot of the things that we take for granted in the tax code, whether it's the mortgage interest deduction or these college tuition credits, can often have harmful impacts. The mortgage interest deduction leads to higher prices of homes because it gets capitalized into the price. And that makes homes actually less affordable, especially in high-cost urban areas like Chicago, Washington, D.C., et cetera. Tuition tax credits get absorbed into tuitions. Colleges know that those credits and deductions are out there, and so they basically capture the value of them through higher prices. We're seeing the same thing now with electric vehicle credits. Who really benefits from those $7,500 credits? Well, it's either the buyer or the manufacturer. Well, I tend to think that it's mostly the manufacturer who prices their product at such a level that they actually get that $7,500. We just pay a little bit more, but think that we're getting a deal. Effectively, our tax code is sort of like going to Neiman Marcus with a little bit of a 10% coupon. We think we're getting a great deal, but we're actually paying a really high price in order to get it.
That's exactly right, man. You're speaking my language as well, because I actually experienced some of what you were just talking about. We had to put a new geothermal system in at our house this year, and I was excited to get a 30% credit on the tax return, but quickly realized that no, the price just jumped significantly because of that credit. And it is the manufacturers charging a little bit more because they know that I'm going to save some money on my tax return. So do you think that that's on purpose? When Congress sets these rules and everything, are they trying to steer dollars towards these certain manufacturers, or is it an unintended consequence? How much thinking goes into that?
Not enough. Many members of Congress are lawyers and not economists. And so they don't understand these unintended consequences. And that's what I really try to lay out in the book in Taxocracy, starting with a lot of stories about tax policy that went awry in the past. Things like the window tax in England, which incentivized people to brick over their windows. That was good for bricklayers, but not very good for poor people who lived in windowless, airless homes. And then you have the chicken tax, which was a tax on for the U.S. On imported delivery vans, which incentivized some manufacturers to import their delivery vans in pieces so that they could be remanufactured here in the United States as American made. And then we have things like the luxury tax, which went in place in about 1992, 1993, and was a tax on luxury items here in the United States. And what happened was that it led to, because it was imposed on things like yachts and high-priced cars and so forth, it really undermined the yacht industry in America and chased it overseas, basically. And so very few yachts are actually made in America anymore as a result of that. So we look at those unintended consequences, and then we take those lessons and we apply them to today's tax code so that we can understand all the elements of today's tax code and how they have oftentimes unintended consequences as well.
Can you think of a good one? Like, can you think of a tax policy where you say, oh, yeah, that was good, that was productive?
Yeah, there are a couple elements in the tax code that are critically important. If we were starting from scratch, there are a couple things we'd want to do. The first thing is not tax our piggy banks, right? Mm-hmm. So we want savings. Remember, savings is often an after-tax activity, so that we want to make sure that we're not double taxing our piggy banks and our savings and investment. As you often probably educate your listeners, our tax code double taxes, triple taxes our savings and investments to an unfortunate degree that's really economically harmful.
Yeah.
So we don't want to tax our piggy banks, our investments, and our savings. The second thing is we want companies to be able to immediately deduct or expense the cost of their investments. You know, we get to expense, if you're in business, you get to expense the cost of your labor, but you have to often amortize the cost of a machine,
Yeah.
a building, an investment of some sort in the tools that help make your employees more productive.
Yeah.
So we could advocate having full expensing for capital investments of all kinds.
All right.
And then the last thing we want to do is we don't want to tax or double tax the income that companies make abroad.
All right,
when they do business abroad, they pay tax. We don't want to double tax them when they try to bring those profits home.
We're gonna pick that back up. We've got more coming up here on the Wise Money Show with Korhorn Financial Group. Yeah, that's good. That's good. I want to pick up both of those, and then we'll get into some more tax policy here. So let me talk to YouTube. Hello, YouTube. Thanks for being here. This is the Wise Money Show. What you're watching right now is our weekly 1-hour talk show that airs right here on the channel, 10 a.m. Eastern time every Saturday morning, also on podcast at the same time, but also on a couple local radio stations, which is why the content is broken up the way that it is, not manufactured just for you on YouTube. But here's good news. We've got lots of content, well over 1,000 videos talking about these exact, same types of tax planning strategies that you're going to hear in this episode and applying it directly to your financial life. Yes, custom fit directly for YouTube, 10 minutes long, 8 minutes long, something like that. So make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications so you're made aware every time we drop new content. If you like the content, my goodness, go out and buy Scott's book as well. Will you do that? So, okay, good stuff. Really curious to pick up. I think in the third segment we'll talk about a wealth tax.
Yes.
I'm curious your thoughts on that and like the potentially unintended consequences. In some countries do tax any appreciation in your net worth. And I have no idea if I haven't done any research on whether that's effective or not. So, yeah, good. Okay, so we'll pick things back up, and then we'll weave into some themes from Secure Act. I don't know if you saw that in the outline, but one is your thoughts on all the energy credits. I mean, we live in right next door is the RV capital of the world. You might not see a lot of RVs around the DC area, but especially through COVID, lots of people, there was a boom with RVs, and this EV has been sort of shoved into that industry. And from a lot of folks, they're saying, well, we have to do it, but the infrastructure is not ready. So we're getting forced to go that direction with all these credits, but people can't drive their RVs very far because we don't have the infrastructure to actually make this work. And so curious your take there. Rothification, and then kind of the push through tax credits for all of us to pay for businesses to have a 401k plan. How did tax policy shape the choices that we make? We call that tax planning, looking at your big financial goals and what decisions you can make to improve your tax picture. That's tax planning. But tax policy can have unintended consequences as well. That's why we're excited to have special guest Scott Hodge on the program today. This is the Wise Money Show with Korhorn Financial Group. Thanks for being here. My name is Mike Bernard. With me in the KFG studios, Josh Gregory, and with us through Zoom, tax policy expert Scott Hodge. Every episode of the Wise Money Show is on podcast. Wherever you listen to podcasts, go check us out. Search the Wise Money Show. Subscribe to it there. Rate the program there. We appreciate it. Share it as well. And by the way, go check out Scott's book, Taxocracy. It's fantastic and talks about, I don't know, I'm just going to oversimplify, Scott. The U.S. tax code is the most complicated tax code on the planet. Talk me out of that. I don't think you will.
That's fair.
And it's just,
I won't disagree with that.
And it's just a big manipulation machine. It is. So you need to know where you want to go in your financial life for your goals, and then what tax opportunities should you consider along the way? And working with your CFP, who's a fiduciary, who cares about you and your goals, looking at all 6 areas of your financial life, implement the ones that make sense, pass by the ones that don't. Now, a couple themes, we're going to pick up where Scott left off. We've had the Secure Act 1.0, had the Secure Act 2.0, had all of these enormous COVID tax bills or stimulus bills. In there, I'm going to pick out a couple themes. And you might say, no, these aren't really themes, but I couldn't see them. One is on tax credits to businesses or for individuals for energy efficient stuff, electric vehicles, those sorts of things. So curious your thoughts there. Second is Rothification of everything. I love the Roth. It's not one size fits all, but do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing? Third is the tax credits for businesses opening a 401k plan for the first time. So I want to hit each of these. Let's start with energy credits. What's your thoughts with that drive, that push in tax policy?
Well, I think this is a terrible way to try to manipulate an entire sector of the economy. It's a surefire way of making it dependent industries. We're going to see some scandals along the way. I guarantee it. Much like we saw with Solyndra a number of years ago, where it got $500 million worth of cheap loans from the Energy Department and then went bankrupt. We're going to see the same kind of things with this. What a lot of people don't realize is that Elon Musk and Tesla did not need an electric vehicle. The electric vehicles were actually some of the first vehicles ever made back in the late 1800s. The first president, McKinley, was McKinley to ride an electric vehicle, and he actually rode in a electric ambulance after he was almost assassinated back in about 1901. So electric vehicles have been around for a long time, and the ones today suffer the same problems they did 120 years ago, and that is charging. They can't go very far. And you don't have the network of like gas stations to be able to go across country with them. Plus, they're more expensive. And what people don't realize too is the impact of the materials that go into it. And they forget sort of the environmental impact of digging up things like lithium and whatnot. But the biggest thing is this attempt to try to get this entire industry to reshape itself around these tax credits. It's industrial planning at its worst. And we've seen this with windmills, for instance. There have been tax credits for windmills for about 40 years, and yet that industry can't take off yet without the help of those tax credits. And so it's truly a dependent industry at this point, and still hasn't been able to wean itself off and become successful without the help of government. And that's a problem. That's a telltale sign that this is an industry that is in trouble and has become completely dependent on government. And I think that ought to give us a great pause about using tax policy to try to move the entire economy in the direction of electricity or electric vehicles and energy efficiency.
Yep. I agree. Let's jump over to the next one. I get teased by Josh and Kevin for loving the Roth IRA so much. And yeah, it is not a one size fits all, but there's been lots of tax policy making Rothification, making it more easy or making it easier or more accessible to fund Roths. Your thoughts on that? That a good thing? And maybe the motive is so they can get tax revenue right now, but your thoughts on Rothification and the steering towards Roth?
Well, economists are kind of neutral between, a traditional IRA, which you get, the tax benefit today, and then you get taxed later on, versus the Roth, in which you pay with after-tax dollars, but then don't get taxed on the back end. Economists tend to think that those are pretty equal, but it all depends upon your long-term tax picture. If you think that you're going to have a lower tax bill later on or tax rate, then the Roth is a great idea. I still think the Roth is a great idea. And I think that we ought to make that kind of policy more available. One of my colleagues here is working on advocating a universal savings account, which is kind of like a giant Roth. And so it would collapse a lot of the different savings vehicles that we have today into a simple tax vehicle called this U.S. savings account or universal savings account, and it would be like a super Roth.
Yeah.
And it's been used very successfully in England and Canada, and is very, very popular, especially among working age people who can use that savings vehicle for anything, not just what politicians tell you to save in this bucket, that bucket, this bucket, and that bucket, but they can do it all in one bucket and then use the proceeds tax free without any penalty.
That's interesting. We do spend a lot of time educating our clients and other community members here on the idea of a Roth IRA, and almost universally, the skeptical eye comes out when they're first learning about it, and the question is always, well, is that too good to be true? I can put money into an investment account, let it grow for the future, and not have to pay tax when I pull it out down the road. And a lot of people wonder, is the government going to pull the rug out from underneath me? Are they going to make me pay taxes essentially twice, pay on the front end and then pay when I pull it out there in the future? But you've spent plenty of time in Washington, D.C. Is that beneath the government? Is that a risk that is maybe being afraid of the boogeyman a little bit too much? Or what do you say to those who maybe are hesitant to using the Roth?
Well, I never put it past Congress and the White House to do something bad on tax policy. So yeah, there's always a danger in doing anything for tax reasons because of the potential that tax policy could change. One of our core principles of the Tax Foundation is tax stability and our ability to be able to make long-term decisions based on the stability of the tax code. Sadly, we don't have a stable tax code. It changes constantly, which makes it very difficult for both businesses and individuals to make those kind of long-term plans. And I know we'll talk later perhaps about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which all expire, most of it expires at the end of next year. And that makes it very, very difficult to make long-term plans.
Yeah. We've often observed that Wall Street seems to love it when we've got kind of mixed government. You've got one team in Congress and one team in the White House, and when they're butting heads and can't get laws changed, that is sort of a backdoor way of getting some of that stability that you had when it's difficult to change the rule book. At least we know what we're facing, right?
You think they're going to apply an RMD to Roths out there in the future? Say, get this out of a tax-free account?
There have been proposals to do that. Whether or not they gain traction is another story, because I do think a lot of people will say this is totally unfair.
Yeah.
And it's bad tax policy. So I do worry about it. But I'm going to cross my fingers that clear heads prevail.
So we record. So this is airing on our YouTube channel. So go check it out if you're listening on podcast or on the radio. Go to Wise Money Show and on YouTube, subscribe to it. Just did a video about some of the benefits of Roth and whether 60 is too late to be funding a Roth. And I talked about one of the benefits is no RMD, and yet hold that with an open hand because they could change that law at any time. We are going to talk about Tax Cut and Jobs Act. Want Scott's opinion on that. So we got more coming up here on the Wise Money Show with Korhorn Financial Group. I actually was really hoping you were going to say, it hasn't even been brought up. I had a feeling you were going to say they've been talking about it, but
there's these kind of things percolate up occasionally, and it really is kind of frightening because you never know how, when these deals are cut, whether that something like that gets traded off for something else. Because right now, in trying to extend some of these tax cuts, they're going to be trying to do it on what we call a revenue neutral basis, meaning it won't impact the deficit. And so they're going to try to broaden the tax base on one side in order to extend the tax cuts on the other side. And that's where they start tinkering around the edges and things like putting an RMD on a Roth in order to save a little bit money so that they can extend the tax cuts. So these things are always a danger.
We're on break, and Lindsay's getting some of the tech stuff figured out. So curious, Affordable Care Act, and now forever, I'm assuming, connection between health insurance and taxes. Of course, it was tax policy gone awry, in our opinion, to link health insurance to an employer to begin with. Back in the 50s, I think it was. But
World War II.
Yeah. Okay. So, but now, Affordable Care Act is in your view, and these premium tax credits and those sorts of things. Good policy, bad policy, neutral policy. Thoughts, or is it more complicated than that?
I don't think that the tax code should be involved in the provision of health care at all. Unfortunately, it is. So because of the employer exemption, we get locked into our jobs occasionally because of the fear of losing our health care. So people don't move around jobs as much as they could or should out of fear of losing their health insurance. The tax credits, if you will, that are for the Affordable Care Act are complicated, and especially for low-income people. Some of that can get clawed back if your income changes.
Yeah. We see that all the time. Yeah.
Well, the problem is with all of this is that we have made the IRS part of the health insurance or the health care industry. We've made the IRS a benefit provider rather than just a tax collection agency.
Right.
And that makes the job of the IRS almost impossible.
Yeah.
Because it's just not, a tax collection agency is not set up to provide benefits, whether it's for electric vehicles, for health insurance, for housing, whatever. And so people complain about the IRS and how dysfunctional they are, but it's Congress that's responsible for making them dysfunctional by asking them to do things that they're not competent to do.
Right. Yeah. All right. Third segment. I want to get into Tax Cut and Jobs Act. If we spend the whole segment on that, that'd be great. And did I read in your bio that you helped shape policy there with the Tax Cut and Jobs Act?
Yes. Yeah. And the Tax Foundation was very involved from the beginning in doing a lot of the modeling for that plan.
That's great. So I never know what's going to come out of my mouth when we get on the air, but I might say that. We'll see. So, all right, here we go. Third segment.
It's out there now.
All right, Tax Cut and Jobs Act. If it sunsets at the end of next year, guys, this isn't that far away. If it sunsets, lots of your tax picture will change. It will change. Are you planning ahead? Work with your CFP on that. It's the Wise Money Show with Korhorn Financial Group. Thanks for being here. My name is Mike Bernard. With me in the KFG studios, Josh Gregory, and with us on Zoom, special guest, tax policy expert Scott Hodge. Actually, we're going to be talking about Tax Cut and Jobs Act. He actually helped shape it and spoke into, he and the Tax Foundation that he was leading at the time, spoke into the formation of it and some of the conditions. We're going to talk about that right now. Stay up to date on all Wise Money content. Find us online, wisemoneyshow.com. Then all over social media, wherever you're at, we are there as well. Search the Wise Money Show. All right. So let's get into it. Tax Cut and Jobs Act. We recently did a show about the big changes that will impact your financial life if things do sunset. So curious, just your overall thoughts, Scott, both on, the White House says if reelected, we are not going to extend it. And yet taxes will not go up if you make less than $400,000. You can't have it both ways. You can't. And so just your overall thoughts on the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, likelihood that it will get extended, or does that depend on the election? What do you think for as far as that tax policy? How would you grade it? So overall thoughts.
Well, I'm saddened that there's not enough discussion about what is going to happen next year from either side of the political aisle and from either of the presidential candidates. Um, if Congress allows the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act to expire, they are essentially sanctioning a $3.5 trillion tax increase on the American public. Because that would be the effect of it, is to raise taxes by about $3.5 trillion. Now, in Washington, that's spun the other way because of the way that our goofy baselines are made. They say, well, no, this is a huge tax cut for Americans that's happening at the end of next year, rather than this actually being a tax increase. So we're caught in this position in which, in order to extend those tax cuts, we're going to have to, quote, pay for them. We're going to have to offset the financial cost to the government of extending the tax cuts with other base broadeners or tax increases in order to make sure that the impact is not too severe on the federal debt and deficit. And so that will be a big part of that debate. And a lot of people kind of forget that the original Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was a $1.5 trillion tax cut. So it was not offset by any other deductions or credits or base broadeners. And so woven into that, however, were things like the $10,000 limit on the SALT deduction, lots of other changes to the corporate tax code, which raised taxes on one hand, but lowered the corporate rate to 21%. So all of these factors make next year's decision very, very complicated. And there are a lot of moving parts to it. And there's simply not enough discussion about what all of that means.
I mean, so here's the deal. If you focus on one side of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, you're focusing on the individual, so the average taxpayer's taxes will go up. That means there's less money floating around the economy and buying goods and services. Overall, our economic output would then go down. Okay, if you focus on the other side, right? Because if more dollars are going to Uncle Sam, they're not going to Amazon. They're not going to Walmart. They're not getting, helping the overall economy. They're going to Uncle Sam. On the other side, all the business changes, if corporate tax rates go back up, as you talk about in your book, that's going to influence how many people they can hire and how quickly they can grow. Right. And so to me, it's a net drag on the overall economic output, either way you look at it. Not to get too political.
No, in fact, economists at the Tax Foundation have looked and tried to model the impact of allowing the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act to expire, and the economic harm would be pretty substantial. It would knock a percentage point or two off the growth in the economy. It would lead to the loss of jobs throughout the economy. Capital investment would go down, and so every income group would be affected in some way. So you can try to protect certain income groups from the harm, but it does, when you look at it from a macroeconomic standpoint, every income group will be affected in some fashion. So it's critically important that we do extend these tax cuts so that we can keep the economy or prevent the economy from shrinking and from losing all those jobs.
Yeah, that's huge. We often tell clients when we think back over the history of tax laws and just how Americans have paid taxes over time, we're often saying that the pendulum is frequently swinging from the high end of the spectrum down to the low end of the spectrum. My personal perception is that we are on the low end of the spectrum as far as taxes when you consider historical rates and everything. I'd be curious to hear your perspective on where we are, kind of compared to history. But also, what is it that would cause us to swing back the other direction? Is it just the expiration of laws like this, where some of the tax goodies are just scheduled to go away, and that will naturally nudge us back the other direction? Or is there something else that would cause us to swing to higher taxes?
Well, certainly from a historic perspective, tax rates are low. Back in the 50s and the highest tax rate was 92%. That got lowered under JFK to about 72%. Back before when Reagan took office, the highest tax rate was around 70%. He lowered that to around 50%. And then the 1986 Tax Act lowered the top marginal rate to 28%. So we've seen this steady decline, especially on the corporate side as well, which we used to have a tax rate for corporations that was around 46%, and it's now 21%. But that's actually good from a competitiveness standpoint, because other countries have been lowering their tax rates too in order to attract capital investment, business investment, create jobs, and so forth. So we have to have low tax rates in order to maintain our global competitiveness. Unfortunately, there's a lot of populism that's rising up now that's demanding higher taxes, especially on the rich. There's worries about inequality. There's concerns that somehow you have this concentration of wealth in America because you have people like Bezos and Musk and Warren Buffett and so forth that are amassing these massive wealth. But those are also signs that we have a very healthy entrepreneurial economy, because each one of those businesses started out very small and became very successful. And so I think by raising taxes, I call these success taxes, where if you start raising taxes on businesses and successful people, you're essentially punishing success. And I don't think that's the message that we want to send through the tax code.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Thoughts on a wealth tax? Do you think we'll, I mean, that's been kicked around. Do you think we end up going there?
I don't. I'm hopeful that we don't, even though there's a lot of talk about instituting one. About 15 or 20 years ago, there were, I think, 15 countries that imposed a wealth tax in some form, and only about 4 or 5 do so now. If you look right now at Norway, which is one of the last of those countries to have one, they raised their wealth tax last year, and they saw an exodus of millionaires and billionaires moving to Switzerland. And that's had a huge impact on their fiscal policy as a result, because all of that wealth and all of those tax dollars went with them. That's a good lesson, I think, for America, in that the more you try to punish wealth, the more apt it is to move. And people say, well, American rich people in America would never move to Europe in order to escape the wealth tax. Well, they don't necessarily have to move in order to see their wealth flee. There was a great example in the book about this very successful art dealer, Elena Sonnabend, and her heirs had to sell off $600 million worth of art in order to pay her estate tax.
Yeah.
Well, who were the buyers of her art? 3 foreign billionaires. So what happened was that the estate tax forced them to sell off their assets, and then foreigners came in and bought up the assets and essentially took them out of the U.S. economy. That's exactly what would happen under a wealth tax in America.
All right. We got more coming up here on the Wise Money Show with Korhorn Financial Group. I completely agree. That was fantastic content, Scott. But if you logically connect what we've been talking about thus far, and I know Congress has never been accused of that. Tax policy shapes our decisions.
Yeah.
But we're going to impose a wealth tax on those that are successful, and it won't influence their decisions. That's not those.
Not how the world works,
can't
right?
coexist. So those who create jobs and those that have been successful will create taxes, and they'll just have to deal with it. No. So I view taxes as it's a speed bump, and so you tax what you want to slow down. Don't tax success. Don't tax folks that are creating jobs, or like you said, don't tax the piggy bank, right? If you do those things, dollars won't be diverted there. I don't know. So I'm curious. We'll get into this next segment. Part of the flat tax idea. I can't remember which candidate a few decades ago said just add it into a sales tax. I think that's concerning. The higher the sales tax, the less consumption. The less consumption, I think we struggle as an economy. So anyway, But you've done way more research and talked to far smarter people than us on that. So we'll get into it. So this is fourth segment. We're landing the plane. And if we go right up to the deadline, then I'll just have to slam us shut.
Do you want any kind of hand signal or something to kind of give warning that we're 1 minute out or something like that?
Yeah, maybe. Because I would, Scott, I would like to promote your book again. And then what else should I mean, this is airing on the YouTube channel, but just for podcast as well. Should I tell folks to go to Amazon, check it out, reach out to Scott? I mean, is there a different way? Reach out to you on LinkedIn or Twitter? Is there anything else you'd want me to say?
The book is available on Amazon. And people can go right there and order it and have it delivered the next day.
Great. Okay. So
one of the things that we might want to talk about is sort of the contradiction, and here we want to encourage people to be smart about tax planning, and yet ideally we should have a tax code that doesn't require tax planning.
Right.
Yeah. Interesting.
The ideal tax code should be what we call neutral, and that is something that we don't have to think about. It doesn't drive our decision making. It doesn't influence the choices that we make. It doesn't try to steer the economy or social behavior. It should be just neutral, a level playing field that doesn't influence our choices. And sadly, we have to engage in tax planning in order to save ourselves.
I completely agree. I think there's a platform to get there. Hopefully we spend most of the segment talking about your thoughts on where we should go with tax policy and what maybe your hope would be. And I think that can give us an opportunity to talk about that contradiction, because you'll be able to speak to, the refs shouldn't determine the outcome of the game.
Can we also work in maybe just sort of some current event on what are you hearing within Washington, D.C.? What are the two sides saying as far as their posturing, especially in a year of election here? What are they wanting to push for, not just the tax foundation? I think that'd be helpful. Yeah,
definitely.
Okay. We'll get into that. Let's do it. We got 10 minutes. I feel like we need 10 times
hour.
that. Yeah. All right. Here we go. Fourth segment, landing the plane. Thanks for being here. This is the Wise Money Show with Korhorn Financial Group. My name is Mike Bernard. With me in the KFG studios, Josh Gregory, and with us on Zoom, tax policy expert Scott Hodge. Every episode of the Wise Money Show, as well as a lot of other content, is on the YouTube channel. Go check it out. Go to YouTube, search the Wise Money Show, subscribe to it there, turn on notifications so you're made aware every time we drop new content like this talk show or the next Wise Step videos that air all throughout the work week, helping you take your next wise step in your financial life. Scott, I am looking forward to it. We're hitting some of the biggest topics right now. And the first is it's an election year. I don't know. You probably didn't know that. And just kidding. It's everywhere. Is there posturing? With you connected to Tax Foundation, having led that organization as president for a couple of decades, and in D.C., is there posturing happening by each side on tax policy? Where do they want to go?
Well, it starts with President Biden, because he put out his budget earlier this year, which contained about a $4 trillion tax increase on net overall. It was quite a substantial proposal, because he would raise top income tax rates on the wealthy from, let's say, 37% to 39.6%. He would want to tax capital gains for the wealthy at that higher rate. He would increase the net investment tax, which is that Obamacare serve tax, from its current rate at 3.8% to 5%. And so that would push the capital gains rate for wealthy people up to well over 40%. And it would be 50% in some states if you add on that state rate. He wants to raise the corporate tax rate to 28%. Let's see now, what am I missing here? He would want to increase the There was a corporate minimum tax. He wants to raise that. There was a stock buyback tax that was enacted in 2022. He wants to increase that. It's a rather amazing package of tax increases. Contrast to that, President Trump has been fairly quiet on the tax front, but his one proposal that everyone's talking about is to impose a 10% tariff on all imported goods, which would be about a $300 billion a year tax increase on American consumers. And it would have a pretty substantial impact, both economically and, of course, on inflation. So that's kind of where we're at. Although I think Trump would extend the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, but he hasn't talked much about how he would go about implementing that.
Obviously, one of the other things that I don't think either candidate's talking about nearly enough, and that's deficit. Of course, you just talked about Biden's budget, but deficit and debt. There is legitimate fear that we're in this upward debt spiral. And yes. And so thoughts on just how could that shape tax policy? And is there, I get, what do we do?
Well, both presidential candidates are responsible for our current level of debt and deficit.
Agreed.
They both went on spending binges that were inexcusable. And really, it's the spending, stupid, that is driving both the debt and the deficit. And until we can rein in the spending side of the budget, there's no amount of tax policy that will allow it to catch up. I've done some calculations, and everyone talks about the tax gap. You know, that's the amount of money the IRS supposedly doesn't collect because of tax avoidance and other complexities in the code. Well, I figured out that even if you were to collect all of what they expect of the tax gap, that's about $600 billion a year, it wouldn't even come close to closing the annual deficit. And so we have to really focus on the spending side of the budget if we're going to control the federal debt and deficit.
Well, to me, raising taxes and tax rates, wildly unpopular. I fear new taxes. And I would just tuck that under the heading of further complication of the tax code. So Scott, in our final 5 minutes or so, I want to open up to the platform, the idea of where do we go with our tax code? I have said I'm not sure how the epiphany came to me or what, but several years ago, this is the most complicated tax laws on the planet, and it is just all about trying to manipulate. So what's a different approach, or where should we go? If you had a blank slate, how would you want the tax policy to be laid out for the U.S. to prosper in the future?
Most importantly is to move away from our income-based tax system to more of a consumption base. And there are different ways that you can get from here to there. And what does that mean? Well, it means that first, understanding the economics of tax policy. Taxes on corporate income and capital income are the most harmful taxes for economic growth. So we want to steer away from that. Taxes on personal income is the second most harmful tax for economic growth, because the more we tax income, the more we influence how much people work and save and invest. And so the least harmful taxes are those on consumption. And I know that you expressed some worries about taxing consumption, but it's really what drives the economy is investment and work effort and capital investment. And so we want to steer away from those kind of taxes to more of a consumption base. And things like a flat tax, for instance, or even a national retail sales tax, a value-added tax, are all different types of tax reforms that move away from an income base to a consumption base, because they don't tax our piggy banks, they don't tax capital investment, and so they're really what's left, they're only taxing what we spend. And that's the most efficient way to get from here to there. The best tax system on earth, in our opinion at the Tax Foundation, is tiny Estonia up there in the Baltics. And they have a variant of a flat tax. They tax corporations or businesses only on the income that they distribute to shareholders and owners. It's much like, think of it as a Roth IRA for businesses. They can retain as much of their earnings as they want, and they only pay tax when they distribute it to their shareholders. That's at 20%. The personal income tax rate is 20%. The capital gains rate is 20%, and the value added tax rate is 20%. So you can see that it's a very neutral tax. It doesn't distort between various types of activities. And so we think it's the most efficient and pro-growth tax system in the world. Other countries have moved in that direction. Poland, Georgia, even Ukraine is now looking at moving in that direction. And we think it'd be a great thing for the United States. And in fact, we modeled it using our tax model to see what it would do for the U.S. economy. It would have a great effect on capital investment and economic growth, and ultimately higher living standards for everybody.
That's awesome. Scott, you're kind of describing an alternate future than the one that we're pointed towards as a nation right now. And I know that you spend a lot of your time at the Tax Foundation trying to not only dream up, but also research and find examples around the country, around the world, where tax laws are working. What do you say to our listeners here as we kind of wrap up the show? Those who are living in today's reality, we have a complicated tax code, and you had said in a break that the best system would be an easy system that doesn't require tax planning. But that's not the reality that we live in today. So what encouragement would you give to those who are trying to make sure that they can squeeze down the amount of tax liability or tax exposure that they have in today's world?
You got about 1 minute. What would you say?
Well, we have a Neiman Marcus tax code where we have everyday high rates, and then we try to lower our rates using all these credits and deductions, and that makes us feel better. We need to really move toward a Walmart tax system where we have everyday low taxes every day, and don't need all the kind of incentives and deductions that force us to think about tax planning on an everyday basis. But when all of those credits are there, you've got to think about, how do I maximize my income and lower my tax liability? And those credits and deductions are there, and you just need to be smart about it. But I will say, don't turn your business around in order to make it placate the tax code, because all you're doing is doing what politicians want you to do and not what's best for your business or your individual life.
So work with your CFP. Tax planning is something that is needed right now. And if you're overlooking it, or if you're not spending time working with an expert on, all right, what strategies exist for you to pay the least amount of tax, then unfortunately in today's reality, it could mean you've got more dollars slipping out of your pocket going to Uncle Sam than should be. Scott, I want to thank you for being on the program. I want to tell everyone to go check out Scott's book, Taxocracy. Get it on Amazon and get it by tomorrow. So go check it out. Scott, thanks for being here. All right, that's all the time we have for today. On behalf of myself, Josh, and Scott, all of us at KFG, have a great weekend. We'll see you next Saturday for the Wise Money Show with Korhorn Financial Group.
Securities offered through Silver Oak Securities, member FINRA/SIPC. Advisory services offered through KFG Wealth Management, LLC. Doing business as Korhorn Financial Group. KFG Wealth Management, LLC and Silver Oak Securities Incorporated companies are unaffiliated.